Good evening. Tonight we'll be back in the book of Jeremiah. If you have your Bible, if you will, turn to the book of Jeremiah. We'll be looking at Jeremiah chapter 23, just reading a few verses tonight. Jeremiah chapter 23, beginning with verse number 1. It says, "Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done, declares the Lord. I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture, where they will be fruitful and increase in number. I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord." Tonight's message I've entitled, Caring for the Flock. You see, for the Israelites, shepherding was ingrained in their history. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, would venture off to marry a wife in northwest Mesopotamia. At the instruction of his father Isaac, he was told to find his uncle Laban, his mother's brother, and marry one of his daughters. From the book of Genesis, we discover that Laban was a shepherd, and so was his daughter Rachel, who caught the eye of Jacob, and whom he would eventually marry. Jacob worked to obtain a wife. If you are familiar with the story, it's found in Genesis chapter 29. You know that he was given 2 wives. Jacob was blessed with many sons while he stayed working at Laban's, his uncle, and Laban too was blessed because of Jacob. His flocks increased. In Genesis chapter 30, verse 29, Jacob said to his uncle Laban, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little that you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been." Jacob and Laban would strike a deal, and Jacob would come to own his own large flocks. Jacob worked hard. He told his wives, "I've worked for your father with all my strength." Jacob worked for Laban for 22 years. Speaking of the care he attended to the flock, which spoke of Jacob's work ethic, he said to Laban, "Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. And it was like this for 20 years. I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks. God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands." You see, Jacob would learn to be a shepherd. Growing up, the Bible states that Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. On the outside, it may have appeared that he wasn't amounting to much. He wasn't active, doing what some of the other young men, perhaps of his age, was doing. He wasn't a hunter like his brother Esau. But Jacob had his own unique qualities. Jacob had this drive about him, a drive to go after what he wanted. For example, we know when he saw his older brother hungry, Jacob saw an opportunity and went after his birthright. I can imagine Jacob being very observant. Isaac, Jacob's father, owned many flocks, and Jacob could have easily seen how they were tended to. Yes, Jacob was observant and opportunistic. And not only was he that, but he was also an overcomer. Yes, Jacob was also an overcomer. Jacob's life experience may have been difficult, but he made the most of it and discovered some hidden talents along the way. His journey would be hard, leaving his family, staying with his uncle. His marriage was far from perfection. And he would begin to walk by faith, and that meant facing his fears. That meant restoring relationships. That meant reconciliation. That meant swallowing his pride. And so before he encountered the unknown action of how his brother Esau would respond, someone who, as far as Jacob remembered, was very upset with him, Jacob would encounter the Lord. And how fitting that is. Is there something you are dealing with? Something that by faith the Lord is calling you to act on? The Lord is calling you to move in the direction of facing a strained relationship? Here it was a strained relationship of a brother. Is there a strained relationship in your life that God is calling you to address? Jacob, as observant and opportunistic as he was, thought it best to offer gifts before the encounter. But before he did that, he did a few other things first, which might be helpful for us to look at, especially in dealing with strained relationships. First thing, Jacob alerted his brother of his intentions. The saying that time heals all wounds was the hope of Jacob at this time. And that may be wise advice for us, especially around those strained relationships where tensions and emotions are still high. Wise advice may be to let things cool down. Jacob stepped back. He stepped away. He removed himself and learned some things while he was away. While he was away, he learned to care for the flock. He married and had children. What things can we learn when we learn to take a step back? With confrontation, it's important to take a step back and let things cool off. To approach the situation not from a place where emotions are running high, but from a place of calm, cool, and collected. And to do this, it takes control, self-control. The control in a confrontation to say, the best thing I can do is to take a step back, walk away, and remove myself from the situation. And do what I can to do my part to clear my head, to calm down, and come back to the situation when I'm more level-headed. Remember, don't lose control. Don't lose your head. There are lessons to be learned in the journey of walking away. Do you think Jacob was able to think about his past, to think about this strained relationship with his brother Esau as he tended the sheep day in and day out? Do you think he was able to kind of go over it in his mind, saying, no, I could have done things differently. Do you think he was able to think about those things as he tended the sheep away from that hostile environment? I'm sure he did. But he gave it time. Are you willing to give it time? It may be a time of learning for you as you learn to step away, to calm yourself. Maybe a time of learning and of processing as it was for Jacob. You know, it's okay to step back and step away. It may be healing. But be sure of this, to follow God's timing. Jacob would eventually return to see his brother. There would eventually be a time of return, a time when God would say to Jacob, go back, do your part, make it right. How do we know when it's time? God will make it clear. God will make it evident to us. If we're staying in His Word, if we're living and walking by faith, God will tell us when it's time. God will work it out. When Jacob was about to return, he sent a message to his brother that was short and simple, saying, I paraphrase, that I've been away for some time now, brother. I'm doing well, and may I find favor in your eyes. He's making his intentions known to his brother. Brother, I would like your mercy. Can we put the past behind us? Here Jacob is taking the steps of action. He's stepping into the unknown. He's not sure how his brother will respond. Jacob, of course, he has his hopes. He's hoping that time would be that healing agent. He's hoping that his brother's feelings would be different towards him. He's hoping that they could put the past behind them. And Jacob's hope, he's got that hope in him, and he's also meeting fear. Jacob's hope would be met with fear. Hope would meet fear. His worst fears would be that his brother and himself would fight, and that it would lead to death. And so he's wondering, how will his brother respond to his return? It says in Genesis chapter 32, verse 7, that Jacob had great fear and distress. And with that great fear and that distress, he still takes action and he prays. You know, are you feeling some nervousness about the holidays? Perhaps there's a family member that you are nervous, fearful about seeing. Perhaps there's a tension there. There's some hostility. Jacob was in great fear and distress about seeing his brother Esau. And yet, Jacob still took action. He still went that direction. He took action and prayed. He humbled himself. And he recognized his need for the Lord. Look at his prayer there in Genesis chapter 32, verses 9 and 12. Genesis chapter 32, verse 9 and 12. If you look over that prayer, you'll see that he's recognizing his walk by faith, his obedience to the Lord. He's waiting on the Lord's timing. There in verse 9, he says, God, you said to go back. And so Jacob is responding. He's walking by faith and he's facing his fears. In verse 10, he's recognizing God's grace and His blessings bestowed upon him. And look particularly there in verse number 11. Jacob's praying. He's praying to the Lord saying, "Save me, I pray." He's depending on the Lord's help. "Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid." We see here this strained relationship is causing fear. It's causing anxiety. It's causing nervousness. And in that fear, he turns to the Lord. Now, I wonder if some of you might be dealing with some of those fears. Are you afraid of what might happen in a relationship? Turn to the Lord, as Jacob did here in his prayer. And then in verse 12, he finds comfort and hope in the Lord's promises. Lord, you said to respond to these relationships in love. You said to love, Lord. Lord, you said to pray. You said to pray, Lord. Lord, I'm clinging to your promises. Jacob was using all of the resources that he felt like he could use. About time, giving it space, time. He turned to prayer. And then he tried to pacify with gifts. Jacob's intentions was to make things right. But he still had this question about how his brother would respond. That remained a mystery to him. Jacob had all these qualities. He had all these talents. Jacob was observant and opportunistic. And he was also an overcomer. He's learning to face his fears and to walk by faith. And here he arrives at the crossroads. He had come to the place of the unknown, the place of mystery, about how his brother would respond. And so the Bible tells us that night, there in the darkness and all alone, he wrestled with a power. Jacob wrestled, but he did not give up. But he was humbled in the process. He was touched. His hip was wrenched. Jacob was forever changed. Jacob, being observant and opportunistic as he was, he held on till daybreak, until the light shone, and he insisted on a blessing. Jacob's talents were shining through. Determination, perseverance, and now forever changed. His name would be an identifier of the process that he went through. Israel. Jacob's name would be changed to Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Dear friend, are you struggling right now? Are you struggling with a decision? Are you struggling with a strained relationship? The Lord says, draw near to Him, and He will draw near to you. We are to walk by faith and face our fears, knowing the Lord is with us. So I pray that this message has been a blessing to you, that you'll lift up any of these concerns, anxieties. Cast your cares upon the Lord, because He cares for you. I hope that you have a good week. Until next time, bye-bye.